The papers were handed to Laurel Ashby Crane in the front hallway of a house she had spent 4 years making into a home. Not in a lawyer's office, not through the mail. In the front hallway, on a Tuesday afternoon in late October, while the smell of the roast she had put in that morning was still moving through every room. Her husband, Callaway Crane, 41 years old and vice president of Crane & Morrow Development. His father's company, his grandfather's name on the letterhead, stood near the door with his coat still on. He hadn't even taken off his shoes. Beside him was Petra. Not Petra from the file, a different one. But the name still lands like that, doesn't it? Petra Holm, 33. A project coordinator at the firm who had apparently been coordinating more than projects for the better part of 18 months. Laurel had known something was wrong for a while. She was 38 years old and not stupid. You feel it before you can name it. The way a man stops telling you small things. The way he answers his phone in another room. The way he looks past you at dinner like he's somewhere else already. But she hadn't expected this. Not the hallway. Not the coat still on. Not Petra standing close enough that their arms were nearly touching, watching with an expression that was almost bored. Callaway told Laurel that he wanted out, that he had been unhappy for a long time, that he thought it was better to be honest than to drag things on. He used the word honest twice, Laurel counted. She stood there holding the envelope and didn't say anything. Not because she had nothing to say, but because there are moments when the right response hasn't been invented yet. She looked at the papers. She looked at her husband. She looked at the woman beside her husband. Then she set the envelope on the front table, the little oak table she had bought at an estate sale in Guelph, and refinished herself over 3 weekends, and she walked back to the kitchen to turn off the oven. That was the last thing she did in that house. She turned off the oven so nothing would burn. What no one in that hallway knew, what Callaway Crane did not know, what Petra Holm did not know, what even Callaway's mother, Vivian Crane, 63, who had spent years making it quietly clear that Laurel was not quite the right fit for the family, did not know, was that the company currently in the process of acquiring Crane & Morrow Development's largest outstanding asset was called Northfield Meridian Group, and Northfield Meridian Group belonged to Laurel. Not Laurel Crane, not the version of herself she had worn for 4 years in that house, at those family dinners, at those firm events where she smiled at the right moments and shook the right hands and was introduced always as Callaway's wife. Northfield Meridian Group belonged to Laurel Ashby, the woman she had been before she took his name, before she moved from Toronto to follow his career, before she had, in the quiet way that some women do, set her own work aside like something that could wait. It had not waited. It had grown. Laurel had started the company 11 years ago, at 27, with 2 partners and a borrowed office above a print shop on King Street West. She had a degree in urban planning from Ryerson and a head for land use that her thesis supervisor had described, in writing, as unusually rigorous for someone her age. She took that as a compliment. Her partners took it as a reason to let her run the numbers. By the time she met Callaway at a conference in Calgary, Northfield Meridian had completed 4 mid-sized commercial acquisitions and was being watched quietly by people who mattered. She was 34. He was 37. He was charming in the way that men who have always been told they are exceptional tend to be charming, effortlessly, and with just enough awareness of it to make you feel chosen. They married 14 months later. Laurel restructured her involvement in the company to silent partner, partly because Callaway had asked her to, and partly because she told herself she could always step back in. She trusted the partners she had built the company with. She trusted that the work would still be there. She was right about the work. She was wrong about other things. The acquisition of Crane & Morrow's Ridgemont property, a 4.2-acre commercial parcel on the edge of the Niagara Escarpment that the Crane family had been trying to develop for 6 years without success, had been in motion for 4 months before Callaway served Laurel with divorce papers. She had not engineered this deliberately. The property had come through standard channels. Her partners had flagged it as undervalued, undermanaged, and quietly desperate. She had reviewed the file, agreed with their assessment, and signed off on the offer. She had not connected it to Callaway's company until she saw the legal name on the title documents. She sat with the knowledge for 3 weeks. She did not call her lawyer about it. She did not call her partners. She did not call Callaway. She sat with it. The way you sit with something that is both terrible and clarifying. The way you sit with the proof of something you already knew, but had been too kind to yourself to fully accept. Then the papers arrived in the hallway, and she turned off the oven, and she left. The Crane family had been in real estate development in southern Ontario for 3 generations. The grandfather had built starter homes in Hamilton in the 50s. The father, Douglas Crane, 71, had shifted the company toward commercial properties in the 80s, with enough success to send both his sons to private school and buy a house in Ancaster with a gate and a circular driveway. Calloway had joined the firm at 26 and been groomed in the unhurried way of family businesses to take over eventually. The Ridgemont property was supposed to be the thing that secured his position. It was the largest single asset the company had attempted. Douglas had approved it. Calloway had championed it. They had borrowed against other holdings to finance the early stages, expecting a development permit that had now been delayed 3 times. By the time Northfield Meridian's offer arrived, Crane and Morrow was carrying more debt than it had in 30 years. The offer was not generous, it was accurate. There is a difference, and the Crane family was in no position to negotiate as if there weren't. Douglas Crane brought in an outside advisor, a man named Horrick Stowe, 55, who had done restructuring work for family firms across the province. Horrick reviewed the books, reviewed the offer, reviewed the options, and told Douglas what Douglas already knew, that they could refuse and risk insolvency, or they could accept and survive as a smaller company with a narrower portfolio. Douglas chose to survive. Calloway argued against it for 2 weeks and then stopped arguing, which was its own kind of answer. What neither of them knew was that the firm sending the offer had been founded and was still majority owned by Calloway's wife, his almost former wife, the woman he had handed papers to in a front hallway while wearing his coat. Laurel rented a furnished apartment in Oakville. She kept the weeks quiet. She went for long walks along the lake in the mornings, the kind of cold-aired November walks where your breath comes out in clouds and there's almost no one else on the path. She called her mother in Halifax twice a week. She did not explain everything, but she explained enough. Her mother was a woman who had rebuilt her own life at 44 and did not offer advice unless asked. She asked how Laurel was sleeping. Laurel told her, mostly fine. She had a meeting with her lawyers about the divorce proceedings. She had a meeting with her partners about the Ridgemont closing. She kept the 2 conversations in separate rooms, in separate parts of her mind, with separate people. This was not difficult. She had always been good at compartmentalization. It was one of the things Calloway had sometimes called cold on the occasions when he wanted something from her that she had already decided not to give. She did not think about him constantly. This surprised her a little. She had loved him, or had loved the person she thought he was, or had loved the version of herself that she was when she was with him, and she was not sure which of those was the truest way to say it. But grief is not always proportional to love. Sometimes the cleaner feeling is the one that arrives first. The closing was scheduled for a Thursday in early December. It would happen at a boardroom in downtown Hamilton, a beige room with a long table and a coffee station in the corner, the kind of room where large impersonal transactions are made to feel routine. Douglas Crane would be there. Calloway would be there. Horrick Stowe would be there. 2 lawyers from Crane and Morrow's firm would be there, a notary. From Northfield Meridian's side, 2 partners, their lead counsel, and Laurel. Laurel had not told her partners she was coming until the morning of. They had exchanged glances but said nothing. They had known her for 11 years. They knew when she had decided something. She wore a charcoal blazer and dark trousers and low heels, and no jewelry except the watch her father had left her. She looked, she thought, exactly like herself, which was the point. She arrived 7 minutes before the scheduled time. The Crane and Morrow team was already there, arranged on one side of the table. Douglas had aged since she had last seen him. Calloway sat 2 chairs to his father's left, looking at a document, and did not look up when the door opened. Horrick Stowe looked up. The lawyers looked up. Douglas looked up. Calloway looked up last. She watched it move across his face in the order that it always moves across a face, when the thing that appears is not the thing expected. First confusion, then recognition, then something underneath recognition that had no clean name. Not quite shame, not quite fear. Something in the space between them, where a person realizes that the story they have been telling themselves has a different ending than they believed. He said her name, just her first name, Laurel. Like a question with no follow-up. Douglas Crane said, "What is this?" Horrick Stowe, who was a professional and had seen stranger things, said nothing. Laurel set her folder on the table and took her seat at the head of the Northfield Meridian side and looked at Douglas Crane, not Calloway, Douglas, and said in the same even tone she used for every transaction, "Mr. Crane, I'm Laurel Ashby, founder and majority partner of Northfield Meridian Group. I'll be representing our firm today." Ashby, not Crane, Ashby. The room was quiet in the particular way of rooms where everyone understands that something has shifted and no one is sure yet of the new weight distribution. Douglas said he needed a moment. They took a recess. Laurel refilled her coffee and stood near the window that looked out over the parking structure across the street, the grey of it and the cold sky above it, and felt nothing she had not already felt in private. She had done her grieving on the lake path in the mornings. She had done her accounting of herself in the furnished apartment. She was not here to perform. She was here because this was her company and this was her transaction, and she had been the kind of woman who showed up for her work. In the hallway outside the boardroom, she heard Douglas Crane's voice and Calloway's voice, lower, and then a silence that stretched. She did not try to hear what they were saying. It wasn't relevant to the closing. When they came back in, Douglas sat down with the particular stillness of a man who has just rearranged something inside himself. Calloway sat down and did not look at her. Not once. Not throughout the rest of the proceedings. His mother's voice was not in that room. But Laurel could imagine it, the way you can always imagine the voice of someone who has dismissed you. Vivian Crane had said, at a family dinner 2 years in, when she thought Laurel had gone to the kitchen and had not, that she always felt that Calloway had settled, that Laurel was fine, but not the kind of woman you built a legacy with. Laurel had stood in that kitchen for a moment, with the dish she had been about to carry out, and then she had carried it out and set it on the table, and smiled and said the food had turned out well, and poured more wine, and said nothing, because that was who she had been, in that house, in that family, patient, accommodating, present. She had been building something else the whole time, quietly, in the background, the way some women build their whole lives, not secretly exactly, but carefully, in the knowledge that certain rooms require you to make yourself small before you are permitted to be large. The Ridgemont transaction closed that afternoon at 4:17 p.m. The documents were signed. The transfer was recorded. Northfield Meridian Group took possession of the 4.2-acre parcel at the edge of the escarpment, the property that had been the thing Calloway Crane had staked his position on, the thing his father had borrowed against, the thing that was supposed to prove something about the family name. Harrick Stowe, to his credit, shook Laurel's hand at the end and said she had run a clean process. She thanked him. She shook the lawyer's hands. She nodded to Douglas, who nodded back with the expression of a man who was still working something through. She did not speak to Calloway. There was nothing to say that the documents hadn't already said better. She collected her folder and her coat and walked out into the December cold of downtown Hamilton, and found her car in the parking structure across the street and sat in it for 3 minutes with the heat running. Then she called her mother. Her mother said, "How did it go?" Laurel said, "Fine, it went fine." Her mother said, "Are you all right?" Laurel thought about the hallway in October, the roast in the oven, the smell of it in every room, the way she had stood holding the envelope and counted the times he said the word honest. "Yeah," she said, "I think I actually am." The divorce was finalized 11 weeks later. There was less to untangle than Calloway had perhaps expected, because Laurel had always kept her finances organized and her name off things that weren't hers. She asked for nothing from the marriage that she had not brought into it. She took her own money, her own work, her own name. She moved back to Toronto in January, into an apartment in the Junction that had good light in the mornings and a coffee shop 3 doors down that knew her order by the second week. She started going into the Northfield Meridian office 2 days a week again, properly, at her own desk, with her own nameplate, which her partners had kept in a drawer and reinstalled the morning she came back. She did not talk about it publicly. She did not post anything. She did not call anyone to make sure they knew what had happened. The people who needed to know, knew. The people who didn't needed to find out some other way or not at all. She heard, through a mutual connection in the development world, that the Crane family had retained the name but scaled significantly, that Douglas had stepped back, that Calloway had shifted into a smaller role, that Petra Holm had been quietly let go from the firm some weeks after the closing, in the way that certain inconvenient situations are resolved, once the reason for them has already cost more than enough. She heard that Vivian Crane had not taken any of it well. She filed this information the same way she filed most information, noted it, assessed it, set it aside. Laurel Ashby Crane, 38 years old, started the new year with a 4.2-acre parcel on the edge of the Niagara Escarpment, a company she had built from a borrowed office on King Street West, and a name she had carried all her life that belonged entirely to her. She was on the lake path one morning in late January, her breath coming out in clouds, the ice in the shallows catching the early light, when she thought about what Vivienne had said about legacy, about what kind of woman you build one with. She walked the rest of the path and said nothing, because there was no one there to say it to. But she thought, you build it with someone who was already building.